Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, are you kidding? I would be much more of a mess than I am right now. There's no question.
Locations are going to be in for the 24th, and the rest of them will be going in the mornings on the days just.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
It is now 7 o'clock. Tonight is Wednesday evening, June 12th. This is a regularly scheduled real property reuse committee meeting. And present at the start of the meeting are, I think we have a full contingent. We have Councillor Oliver from Ward 1, Councillor Lucas and Vice Chair from Ward 2, Councillor Maliki from Ward 3, Councillor Gentile from Ward 4, Councillor Getz from Ward 5, Councillor Laredo from Ward 7, Councillor Lipoff from Ward 8. I am Councillor Danberg from Ward 6 and Chair of the committee. And also present, I see, and please let me know if more have come in since I made this list. Councillor Kelly from Ward 3, not a member of the committee, but in attendance, and we welcome all of those who have taken the time to come. We have Councillor Block from Ward 4. We have Commissioner Josh Morse, Building Commissioner. We have Councillor Albright from Ward 2. We have Barney Heath, who is Director of Planning. We have Cassidy Flynn, who is our administrative person. And we have George McMains, who is, George, would you tell us what your title is, please?
Currently, I'm the acting chief of police.
Yes, thank you. Acting Chief George Maines. We have Joe Iodenisi from Planning. We have Attorney Andrew Lee. And we have New TV joining us. Thank you for all those who are here.
Councilor Danberg, you have the chair of the school committee also.
Oh, and we have Dr. Nolan, who has just joined us. No, I'm sorry, Chair of the School Committee.
Yes.
Chris Bresky.
Chris Bresky.
Chris Bresky, thank you very much, Mr. Bresky, for joining us. And do we have Dr. Nolan with us? We had asked her to join us.
Not yet.
She has not
Perhaps she has
joined.
She is not able to make it this evening. Um, uh, we, tonight, as we all know, is also game 3 of the NBA Finals. I'm sure everybody here is aware of that. So they are starting at 8:30. I know there are many people here who would love to watch that. So we will try not to linger and move through business as expediently as we can. So we're going to start with the first item, which is item number 205-24. Reuse of parcel of land on Chestnut Street. The Director of Planning and Development submitting on April 8th, 2024, a letter stating that the 8 parking spaces on city-owned property at 25 Chestnut Street should be made available for sale or lease pursuant to the City of Newton Ordinances, Section 2-7. The background on this is that these spaces were leased by Bank of America, the current lease for which is expiring. And the party interested in leasing it, these 8 spaces, would like an expeditious determination, if possible, on whether the committee would like to open the spaces up for public lease. So let's go directly to Attorney Lee, who has a presentation. Attorney Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My presentation is focused solely on the process with regards to this particular matter. I had a PowerPoint that I included in the packet, and I'm going to bring it up right now. Are you all able to see that?
Yes.
Thank you. So this is about the process for the parking spaces that are part of the police property over at Chestnut Street. So you've seen this chart many times, but I always like to use it as a reference to point out exactly where we are in the process. So first, the city department that held the property had declared the property available for lease. That was the police department, as I just mentioned. Now, we've gone through all of these other steps here, including the director submitting a written report to the clerk with a recommendation on how the property should be treated. This block right here that's outlined in red is where we are tonight. This is the first time that this item has come before the Real Property Reuse Committee. And the next step the committee has to take is to make an initial determination that the property either be retained and in the custody of the same or different department, or the property be made available for lease. Of course, the reuse property has the discretion to hold a public hearing before making the initial determination, but that is not a requirement. The initial determination is a non-binding recommendation. If the determination is for a lease, if the determination is that the city keep the property, what happens is that is the recommendation of the Real Property Reuse Committee, and that goes to the full city council for their approval or rejection. Now, this property specifically has no buildings on it. Under 2-7, the Real Property Reuse Ordinance, if there is a property that does not have a building on it, the Reuse Committee can waive the requirement of the Joint Advisory Planning Group, the JAPG, and they can do that just by a simple majority vote. That doesn't need to be approved by City Council. It is an authority that is granted to the Real Property Reuse Committee itself. The JAPG, I'm not going to get too much into it, but what they're supposed to do, as you all can appreciate, is the JPG is created to study the property and make recommendations with regards to alternative uses for it. This is a process that's usually followed when the property is fairly large, or there's a lot of different types of uses that it can actually accomplish. So if initial determination is to make the property available for lease, the process continues. And then the first thing that happens is the JPG is created. But as I just mentioned, that could be waived. If the JPG is waived, the Reuse Committee has 2 options. They can consider the recommendations that were in the prior planning report that I mentioned the Director of Planning and Development has already submitted, or they can request an additional report from Planning and Development. If they request that additional report, it has to be submitted in a certain time frame from the date that the JPG is waived, which is 180 days. No matter what, under 2-7, a public hearing is required. It is not required before the initial determination, but it is required before the Real Property Reuse Committee makes their final recommendation to the City Council. And depending on what the Real Property Reuse Committee does with regards to waiving the JAPG and requesting the report, that affects the time by which a hearing actually has to be set. But these times are all here, and I can remind you of them depending on what your actions are tonight. This is kind of like a choose your own adventure deal where what actions the Real Property Reuse Committee has depends on what actions you take. And then potentially you can have a different choice tonight of what it is you do, which I'll summarize at the end of this presentation. So the last step of the reuse committee after the close of the public hearing, so that's after the initial determination, after the decision with regards to the JPG to waive it or not, after the decision on the report. Then the Real Property Reuse Committee holds a public hearing, and at the close of that makes a recommendation to the full City Council. That recommendation is whether or not the property should be sold or leased or returned to the agency, which is the police department. If the recommendation is to make the property available for sale or lease, and again, this is the final recommendation, the Real Property Reuse Committee also has to recommend the minimum sale price and set specific use characteristics of the property. Of course, they can also make certain recommendations by resolution. Once the full City Council has the recommendation from the Real Property Reuse Committee, they have to, by a 2/3 vote, either adopt their recommendation, perhaps maybe do a different one, but if the recommendation is to make the property available for lease, then it has to be a 2/3 vote, and then they are authorizing the mayor to lease the property subject to the minimum financial terms that are in the recommendation. Then the mayor will take the appropriate action based on what the City Council then ultimately voted on. So I know there was a lot of process here, and I try to summarize what the options for the Real Property Reuse Committee are in this one slide. The very first thing the Real Property Reuse Committee has to do tonight, if they decide, is to make an initial determination. And I'm going to ignore what ended. I'm just going to explain, if you make a choice, what the next option is. So if the decision is to make the initial determination to make the parking spaces available for lease, this will automatically begin the process of starting the JPG. However, as I noted, the Real Property Reuse Committee in the same night can waive the requirement of the JPG. And then if they waive the requirement of the JPG, they have to determine whether to request an additional report from the Director of Planning and Development. Again, they don't need to, they can just rely on the report that the director has already submitted. Once they made the determination, if they determine that they don't need an additional report, they're going to rely on the report that was already provided by the director, then they can set a public hearing date. All of these actions can be taken tonight, but only if, again, the sequence of actions that I just set forth are all done. I can answer any questions now or as we go through the actual item.
Okay, let's bring it into committee. Does the committee have any questions or comments? I am not able to see hands up. Miss Flynn.
Counselor, yep, I was gonna say,
tell me?
Counselor Gentile, Counselor Lucas, and Counselor Maliki have their hand raised.
And Counselor
Okay.
Getz as well.
Getz, Maliki, Gentile. Okay, let's start with Counselor Gentile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew, just one quick question. My understanding is that the property is been sold or is under agreement, and that is why this is coming up at this time. Is there anything that prevents the administration, the city, from entering into an agreement with the new owner to lease some spaces now?
To lease, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question. Maybe if I explain the current status, But I want to preface it with, I understand that the director is going to give a presentation about the lease and the specifics about this property, but you've asked a question, so let me provide you with some information that might answer it. Right now, the property is currently leased, not just the 8 spaces that are under consideration tonight, but I think 16, or something similar. The director will correct me.
14.
14, sorry. So there's 14 spaces currently leased to the owner of the building. And
The new owner?
the current owner right now, it's still owned by, from what I understand, Bank of America.
Okay.
And then the proposal is to lease 8 of the spaces. That lease expires in September of this year and cannot be extended.
But
So-
couldn't the city enter into a new lease with either Bank of America or whoever is gonna own the property? I
The
mean,
city can
another-
only with the city council approval through this process. In a sense, it'll operate as a new lease, so the mayor can't on her own just extend it out.
I'm not following. I don't, I mean, it's, the city owns the property and they're leasing spaces now. And somebody new wants to lease 8 spaces and get into a, who knows, 5-year lease or whatever. You're saying we can't do that without going through the reuse process?
That's correct, because the initial real property reuse process that was taken back in 1984 to originally lease this was a 40-year lease. It was 20 years in initial term with 2 options to extend 10-year terms, right? So a total of 40 years, which is what brings us to September of 2024. Those were the limitations with regards to that the city council can set for the term of the lease. So the city council set that term of the lease, and because the city council set that term of 40 years and that 40 years is up, the mayor doesn't have the authority to simply continue the lease. What happens at the expiration of the lease automatically is it reverts back to the city, goes into the department, in this situation being the police department, right? And then it has to go through this reuse process. So it is a little bit earlier, but I think this is being done in anticipation of the expiration of the current lease.
So again, I just want to be clear. So it reverts back to the police department. And the police department can't in turn enter into a new lease just as a landlord. It has to go through the whole reuse process?
That's correct. When there is any property interest that is owned by the city that is being disposed of, which includes a lease, it has to go through the reuse process.
Well, again, we're not going to be disposing of it. We're going to hold on to it and we're going to lease out some spaces, just as if we had a city building and we were going to enter into a lease to rent 1,000 square feet of that city building to a private entity.
And if we were to do that lease, that would have to go through the reuse process. Again, disposition means any real property interest. A lease is a real property interest. The city still owns it. We own the underlying fee, but we are, again, that lease that's being granted, that requires city council approval for the mayor to be authorized to do it.
I'm going to hold it. Counselor Gentile, have you finished with your questioning?
Yeah, I'm still a little puzzled because I've known of situations where we have leased, the city has leased city-owned property in the past. So I guess I don't understand the difference here, but I don't need to take up more time.
But I'd like to clear it up though, because this is a very important point, right? Anytime the city leases, and a lease is something specific, a lease is a real property interest that gives the leasee real property rights. You might be conflating this with, there are certain license agreements that the city enters into for the use of property, but that's not a lease. That doesn't grant any real property rights. All that grants is the opportunity for whomever the licensee is to use the property. But then those are terminable at will. They have a lot of differences than a lease, which again, under law is a real property interest. And that's what we're talking about here.
So the police department could enter into a license agreement.
They could enter into a license agreement if they wanted to,
Okay.
depending on, the specific parameters of what they're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, instead of going on with the questioning, I'm going to ask Barney Heath if he would please give us his presentation, because I think that this will answer a lot of the questions. And I understand that Lawrence Lee is here. representing Bank of America and would like to give a short presentation. So let's first start with Mr. Heath, and then we'll hear from Mr. Lee, and then we'll go back to questioning. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Danberg. Let me do, the first thing is, let me try and share my screen here so we can have a common understanding of what we're talking about. Can folks see that? I can.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to speak to it if my head is turned a little bit. So this is the area that we're talking about. I think folks are familiar with the police annex, and Acting Chief McMains is here as well to answer any questions, because that was the first place that I went. So as Attorney Lee indicated, there has been a continuous lease in place for these parking spaces, and the ones shown here are the ones outlined in green. I think they amount to 14 spaces. That crosshatched area is the accessible path next to the accessible space. It has been in continuous lease since 1984. The lease is due to expire in September of this year. The building itself was formerly occupied by Bank of America, I think most folks know, and has been vacant for, I think, a couple years. Those of you that are familiar in West Newton Square could probably be more exact. So there is a new potential owner. I don't know what the status, perhaps Attorney Lee can speak to that, of the former Bank of America property, and would very much like to have parking associated with the building, because there is otherwise no parking associated with that building. And the proposal from the owner would be for the 8 spaces shown here in red. Happy to answer any questions at this point. It's probably better to do that than continue to present.
Vicky, you're muted.
Sorry, excuse me. Yes, let's check and see if we have any counselors that would like to ask questions on what we've just heard. Counselor Lucas, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Lee, Andrew Lee, question for you. If the Real Property Reuse Committee, I guess, votes not to make this available for sale or lease, I believe that's an option. What is the process? You know, can you tell me about the next steps? You know, the city retains ownership. What happens to those 8 spaces then?
It goes back to the sending agency, in this instance being the Newton Police Department. This particular property is interesting. These spaces are interesting because if you look very carefully, you can see that actually the property, the lot, that blue outline of where the Bank of America building, and I'm going to just keep referring it to it as the Bank of America building, where that is, the lot line actually bisects several of the spaces, about 7 and then a little bit of the 8th. And that's an accurate representation of the lot lines as they exist today. So if the Real Property Reuse Committee were to make the determination and send it back to the Newton Police Department, we're not talking about these full spaces, right? It's just a portion of it that, of course, the police department would have to figure out what it is they'd like to do with it.
What? Okay, so if we were not to make this available for lease or sale, the Bank of America building owner, represented by the other Mr. Lee on this call, they would retain half of 7 spaces, and the city would retain one full space and a half of 7 spaces?
Approximately, yeah,
That's correct. Yeah.
that's
What
right.
you're seeing on the screen.
Oh, boy. We don't make this easy in Newton, do we?
No, we don't.
Boy. So if it reverts back to the police, does the police department need to use those spaces because they are using the lot behind the other bank in West Newton Square at the one that's the special permit. So I guess my question would be to Acting Chief McMains, do you need those 7, 8 spaces?
Thank you, Counselor. I would suggest we don't necessarily need them. We are gaining, by getting 6 spots back, we are gaining a significant amount of parking. We also have parking in front of the police station on 25, or in front of 25 Chestnut Street. We also have parking on Davis Court. The parking we are allowed to use from Santander Bank, that's temporary. We're going to lose that shortly, so we wouldn't really be able to use those. So
Okay. Oh,
we appreciate the use of those, but again, if Bank of America or the new owner owns those half of that property, they're really of not any use to us. So
okay, so you don't need those 8 spaces or 7, 8 spaces.
that's correct.
Okay.
We would actually be gaining 6 spots in any case, whether we reassign a lease to those 8 spots or not. So
Okay.
for us.
Yeah, so I'm just, West Newton Square, there's a parking problem, meaning there's not enough spaces. So, and we could maybe reconfigure those spaces, and we probably, I don't know, I don't think we would get the full 8 again unless the new owner of that building at 1 Chestnut wants to sell those spaces to the city, which I don't think is probably going to happen. But I'm inclined to keep the spaces, but I want to hear from everyone else on the committee. So I'm almost set for now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, we have Councilor Maliki next. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've got a lot of questions. And I did realize the split situation of the parking spaces. Does anyone know the historical background to that? Did the property lines predate cars or something?
I do vaguely, Counselor Maliki, but what I'm saying I'm sure about, but exactly how it played out, I'm unsure. Let me explain it this way. Back in 1984, when this property was originally leased, I don't think this was the layout itself. It had changed, and then part of the deal was the Bank of America building owner, the leasee, had to actually do the work to construct the parking spaces. I understand that was part of the deal. I could never locate the exact design plans, but it's very possible that that's why these spaces kind of emerged to look like this, so that they were able to utilize the lease spaces that, keep in mind, they had 40 years at the time, and then combine it with a lot that they had, or a piece of the lot they had, so that they could maximize the amount of parking that's available there. That's as much as I know. So again, it's something that seems to have been part of the original deal back in 1984.
Okay, when the memo refers to leasing 1,049 square feet, what does that represent on the map?
That represents the red area.
The whole red area?
Yeah,
but
correct.
We don't own the portion of the red area that's.
Nope. So
within the blue area.
if you look at the red area, I see where there may be some confusion. It's just this, if you can see my cursor, just this area right here.
The long L. So is that because I was estimating that at about 800 square feet.
I think I pulled it from a survey for about 1,000 square feet. Attorney Lee may have, either of the Attorney Lees may have more accurate information than that, but that's the approximate.
Okay. Why would we give up, well, any of them, but particularly the the almost full space on the left end there, that's it has that tiny little bit of blue line over it, but basically it's a whole space.
So again, I think the petitioner could speak to that in terms of the number of spaces that they minimally require here. And I think they have a minimum requirement they're seeking in order to be able to tenant the building. I think that's the answer there.
Okay, and you've told us about the length of the lease. What, just out of curiosity, I know it's probably old numbers or current costs would be more, but what was Bank of America paying, say, in the last 10 years per year?
Yeah, so the last 10 years started at 25,500, and this most recent year is 32,900 for the 14 spaces.
For 14 spaces. Okay. Are there any easements associated with the lease? Because basically anyone who's utilizing those spaces is crossing the NPD driveway to use them.
Attorney Lee, do you want to speak to that?
There's no easement. The way that it was set up was access to those spaces were included in the lease itself.
Okay.
Is
Okay,
that it, Counselor Maliki? I would like to hear from Attorney Lawrence Lee, because I think as attorney for the Bank of America, he could clear up some of the questions and potentially answer them.
so he's attorney for the Bank of America, not
Yes,
the
correct.
purchaser. Okay, yeah, just to, I'll give you my comments right now. I agree with Counselor Lucas about, to me, giving up anything that we could turn into public parking spaces for West Newton Square, it's worth keeping, even if it's just, you know, turning that strip of our share of the, depending on how you count them, 8 spaces, 7 spaces, turn them into parallel parking and making them available, or making those police spaces and making part of Davis Street or another part of the lot available for public parking spaces, I think is worth doing. You have to think about what would it cost us to buy parking spaces and if we could even do it. Thanks.
Okay, let's hear from Lawrence Lee. And we have on the list Counselors Oliver Gentile, Kelly Albright, Wright, and Laredo in that order afterward. So go ahead, Mr. Lawrence Lee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So Lawrence Lee, for the record, thank you for having me tonight. And for the record, I do represent the potential purchaser rather than Bank of America. We are under contract to purchase the property. If I may, I would like to share my screen so that I can show some additional information that may be helpful to the council.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
All right, so obviously some visuals here on the ground. If anyone who is familiar with this and anyone who is not really looks at this as really a long time use. I remember as a kid, clearly this arrangement has really been there for quite some time. I think a lot of folks who think that the parking spaces here, these are the ones that we're talking about, belong to the city. But in fact, half of it, if you were to cut the vertically, and I'll show you by a site plan, they will not exist. And I think maneuvering was going to be a big problem for the city if they were going to be eliminated. So again, this is the aerial photograph. And I'm going to get into, and this is a zoom in. So I have some of these various images that we can get back to if you want to look at it closer. That's the assessor's map. And here's a survey plan, which may be helpful. So the 1,000+ change square foot is really this piece right over here where my cursor is. Our property line basically cuts a good portion of these spaces. So effectively, they don't exist without this piece right over here. I think by way of some background too is when my folks are looking into this, they the building is a bank. So I think we also have to look at this holistically and not just the parking spaces or the 1,000 square feet of land. So we have Bank of America that's been here for 4 decades, using this in conjunction with the police annex. We have a building that's built as a bank. So ideally, turnkey-wise, a ideal tenant isn't a bank, but it could be another business if a bank does not work out. My client is open to the idea of wanting to, his preference is to keep everything sort of unchanged. The building itself, it's a very beautiful building. He doesn't want to do any changes to it. He wants to get another tenant in there soon, but it's obviously heavily dependent on parking. So as it relates to Councilor Malachi's concern about parking for West Newton Square, that this building actually is part of our neighborhood. So this building actually needs parking for it to work as well. So again, whether it's another business that comes in, parking is going to be critical. My client also indicated to me that he is willing to open it up on the off hours. So let's say we have a tenant during the off hours where they're not in operation, whatever that tenant may be, he is willing to let the public use it, or the city, whichever way is beneficial to the square. So I think this is a win-win situation in that if if we sort of continue the way it is, number one, no changes really need to be made because the spaces already exist. Number two is that the city will actually get the benefit of the income that's generated from 8 parking spaces versus perhaps no income, perhaps 3, maybe you can get out of parallel parking. I don't know what you would do with snow removal or any of that stuff. But I think having those spaces, now you're ensuring that a tenant going in, which our preference would be someone who doesn't need to do any changes to the exterior of the building, will be able to just get in there and start operations, all the while benefiting the square as a whole. So by way of some further clarification, even though the words are used as access easement, the original plan, the original lease basically encompasses this parcel right here. It's about 9,800 square feet approximately. So part of our request would be to continue to lease these spaces, which again exist only with our property in play, and to have the access to go to and from those spaces through the same way it's always been. So that's, I hope, adds a little bit more information, clarity, and I hope to sort of give you a different perspective of why I think it's important to look at it inclusive of us, this critical piece of the property, and that works in conjunction with these parking spaces. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councilor Getz, you're next. You're muted.
Okay. Julie.
We can't hear you, Councilor Getz.
Still gonna try again. Okay. How long is it was the access to the site, but those pictures were really, very explanatory in terms of just, it's really directly in. But I wanted to ask, acting police chief McMains, just even in terms of, it's tied to the length of the lease, whether or not the future renovations would be needed by the police department, if this, I didn't know the terms of the lease, how long it was going to be, 10 years, like the earlier leases, in terms of the length of the lease.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, we are planning on renovating that and making it a training facility at some point. We have a needs and feasibility study being done now about redoing headquarters, et cetera. When that happens, we will work with planning, we've worked with DPW to identify parking spaces around the area to house the up to 50 cars that we might have for a training event. That would include the Elm Street lot, or the Elm Street lot. Some of the parking at police headquarters, some of the metered parkings on Washington Street, et cetera. Currently, I don't know when that plan is expected to be executed, but it's going to be a few years down the road for sure.
Right, but then the follow-up question would then go to Attorney Lee. You know, how long are we going to enter into a lease? You know, with what is the requested time length of the lease? I'm just trying to, you know, the competing needs.
I understand the question. The first question, who's going to come up with the term of the lease? That's going to come from the city council of how long it's going to be. With regards to how long it should be, I would have to hand the mic back to Officer McMains in terms of, you know, practically when they expect that they're going to need it back, and then comment on how long of a lease that they would be comfortable with.
Right, I just don't want to, you know, have a need down the road in 10 years and then have it not available. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We've also been joined by Counselor Wright and by Lara Kreitzer from Planning. Counselor Oliver, you're next.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And thanks for all the information that's been shared here. It's immensely helpful. There is something that over the past several days, this is meant as a disclaimer. My heckles are a little bit up with some of the issues going on in the city in terms of, you know, how materials are being presented to us by petitioners. So if I come across as a little bit assertive tonight, perhaps more so than I normally have been, that's why. So we just heard from the petitioner stating that, you know, these parking spaces are not viable without their half, so to speak, of these spaces. And as much as I agree with that, these aren't spaces without the city's half of these spaces either. So let's just agree that the starting point here is, you know, half of these spaces go to, right, the petitioner. Half of these spaces are currently owned by the city. So last I checked, nobody wins if we each don't play ball here. So that's my heckles part. So I'm very sympathetic to what we have heard from Councilor Lucas and Malachy in terms of what I'm going to call the parking desert that we currently have in West Newton. And granted, you know, we're talking about a handful of spaces here, but every handful of spaces I think are going to help quite a bit. And at this point, I'm just, do we know, Attorney Lawrence Lee, if I may be so formal, but to keep it simple, do we know or have an understanding of what the intended use of this building might be?
Our first preference is a bank, because that's the building has been a bank for 40 years. The safe is all there. It's all built out.
Okay.
But my client had spoken with a potential tenant that's a bank, but they backed out recently. So, but that's our first preference.
Okay. Which would be my last preference. But anyway, so theoretically then, were it to be a bank, these spaces would be available for public use outside of banker's hours.
That's the intention, correct?
Right. And then to City Attorney Lee, then can we include in a potential lease, were we to decide, hey, yes, it makes sense for us to extend this lease or to release these, can the conditions of the lease include very specifically, we want these spaces available to the public for public use outside of some specific hours? Because my understanding is that in many cases, the reason why businesses do not make their parking lots available to the public is because of the cost of insurance. And I'm just curious, can we put conditions like that into a lease?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's very good to know. That's crazy helpful. I appreciate that. I'm going to limit my time to those particular questions. So that's all for me for now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Oliver. Counselor Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure if you want to take your committee first. I just happened to get my hand up, but I see other people's hands up who are on your committee. I'm happy to go after them if you would like to do it in that order. Or I'm happy to speak as a Ward 3 counselor.
I think we'd like to hear from you as a Ward 3 counselor.
Okay, thank you. I don't have this history in writing, but my understanding and recollection, now having been in West Newton for, I don't know, 35 years, is that this was the Newton Waltham Bank, then Bay Bank, then Bank of America. And before the police used the space, you know, it was a library, and they had metered public parking in that lot. And there were, until very recently, 14, not 8 spaces that were used. So I think I must have imagined it or saw a different plan that showed all 14 spaces along the bank side slightly angled as potentially going to either that use or the public, which I would be in favor of, because as many other people have already spoken, there is a paucity of public parking. And I understand the police have a need, but they're slowly taking over a lot of what used to be public parking spaces on Chestnut Street in front of the annex, along Davis, now in the Santander lot. There's less and less public parking available. So one of my questions is why only 8 and not 14? And I like the idea of a shared use. It depends, I suppose, on what the use is when off hours would apply. With banking hours, I did hear Councilor Oliver say it wouldn't be his first use. On the other hand, one thing I like about bank hours is that there's a lot of other time that they're not open, that it would be open for the public. So my preference here would be to make 14 of those spaces available to whoever is going to be leasing that side of it, and have them be combined, shared for public use. Perhaps Lawrence Lee could tell us why the potential buyer who doesn't have a potential client yet only wants 8 of those versus all 14.
Yes, let's hear from Mr. Lawrence Lee. Go ahead.
I think we would love to have 14, but you know, in terms of 8, I think that's what sort of the minimum that our lot impacts in terms of our sort of this joint. So I want to kind of address the question as well as kind of going back to Councilor Oliver's comment. The way we see this is sort of a joint venture, and I think I had alluded to doing this in a mutually beneficial way. So we see this as a win-win, right? And we get to use part of the city land for our benefit. The city gets to use part of our land for its benefit. From an income use standpoint, from the maximization of the number of parking spaces that are there now and continue to be. So I think we would love to have 14, but in terms of making our property work and to allow a tenant to come in without uncertainty, that the 8 spaces is what we need really sort of as a minimum. And then I do want to take this opportunity to address sort of the lease terms, if you allow me, as well, because commercial leases tend to be for longer periods of time. It's very common to be 10 plus, 20 plus years, just like it has been for the last 40. So I do want to address that. And then as it relates to the discussions about hours of operation, in terms of crafting language, we do need to make sure that we allow flexibility, which Councilor Kelly, you alluded to. A bank has different hours versus maybe a restaurant. So if the city were to restrict a set hour in the criteria, we would be stuck and we can't rent it to different businesses. So we have to be mindful about that wiggle room that we need as well.
Counselor Kelly, I wonder if you could speak to what hours, since you are Ward 3 counselor, what hours are the crunch hours for parking? I know in Newton Center, the evening hours, believe it or not, are the crunch hours because of restaurant customer needs.
Well, you know, we've seen that change, particularly with the viability of the cinema. And with whether there was a Santander Bank there and there's gym now, again, replacing the former gym. So it shifts. Right now, you'll see that Cherry Elm lot is really full, particularly when the police lot was being paved. It was totally full all day, early, meaning businesses and gym goers couldn't even park there. Now that the police lot is paved, it's much better, but there's that problem starting very early that impacts local businesses. This lot, all 14 of those spaces were used previously, and I suppose they were paying rent on all 14 of those spaces, not only 8. I would just hate to lose the ability of those for the public. Somewhere between 9 and 5, and then restaurants, 5 to 9. It's a busy thing. And then a question I have to Mr. Lawrence Lee is, if it's a bank, would some of those 8 be reserved for ATM use only, as we saw at Santander, with, for quick, 10-minute sort of parking? That then kind of opens yet at the same time restricts the ability of other people to park there for other uses. I'm thinking some of the businesses around the corner, Paper Mouse, etc. Sometimes it's hard for their customers to find parking. If it is going to be a bank use, do they anticipate reserving some of those 8 spots for ATM use?
It's a very good question. We've not gotten into those details. I think it'll be very tenant specific. But I think the idea is that whomever the tenant is, my folks want to be able to allow other people to use it during off hours. I think that's the key here. But we have to make sure that we are also flexible enough to allow the tenant to dictate some of their requirements in order for them to make the space work for them.
Right, of course, I understand. I wish you were asking for all 14. Okay.
Okay.
Chair Danberg, any other questions for me?
What I would like to do now is to bring it back into committee with Councilors President Laredo and Councilor Lipoff.
Thank you, Chair Danberg. So, Mr. Lee, who's your client?
Jim Youngblood.
Okay, is that a corporation or an entity or an individual?
He has a couple of other partners. I'm not intimately involved in the transaction itself. I was brought in to help with this process and navigate through this, but I am not privy to the business terms of the transaction.
And do they own other real estate in West Newton currently?
That I don't know. I don't have an answer to that.
Okay. Mr. Director Heath, I want to go a couple questions for you, and it probably relates to Attorney Andrew Lee as well. When I looked at the schematic that you put up there, it did not look to me like the bank owned 50% of each of the parking spaces. Has someone actually done a measurement?
There's been a survey done, and I think we saw a survey earlier. So, no, I'm not.
So you don't, I mean,
whether it's a third or a half, I'm not really sure.
Well, that makes a huge difference, okay? Because we're being told that we effectively may not be able to use these spaces because they're divided down the middle, so to speak, with the bank owning half and the city owning half. If in fact the bank owns a third of the space and the city owns 2/3, then the city, and what's an average parking space in depth? 19 feet? Mr. Director Heath?
Yep.
So all you'd have to do is move back 5 or 6 feet. You'd be all in city-owned land. You wouldn't have to deal with issues with the bank. And we've routinely allowed spaces to be shorter than 19 feet in certain circumstances, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I really think before we proceed any further, it's critically important that you get the facts straight here in terms of what the actual measurements are of the parking spaces, and not just rely on a representation that is just about half. Attorney Andrew Lee, is there any argument here that we own this other real estate by adverse possession?
No,
Why not?
because the city never used that property.
We've owned it and we've leased it out, correct?
No, we've owned the property that is part of the parking space. At no point did we ever
Okay.
assert that we own the remainder of it that's on
And
the
we,
bank.
and we never used that remaining portion at any time?
Not from any records I could see.
Okay, that's good to know. I want to make sure we get our facts straight. Do you have an understanding of the metes and bounds of those parking spaces?
I do not.
All right, colleagues, I'm just going to urge us, we have to understand that fact before we can make any decisions here. I'm just going to offer my observations that I agree with Councilors Maliki and Lucas. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that we're going to enter into a lease with this tenant. And then, we'll work with them for shared space. That may or may not work. We have no idea. If there's a bank there, I suppose it might work better than if there's a restaurant, but we're going to be asked to enter into a lease with this landlord, not the tenant. There may not be any tenant in there. I'm sure Attorney Lawrence Lee is a very good lawyer, and he would put in language that gave his clients sufficient flexibility. So if a restaurant, for example, went in there, they would argue that the restaurant would be able to use it during its hours and we would use it in other hours. At least if I was in Attorney Lee's position, that's exactly how I draft. So I don't think we should do anything to assume that it's going to be that way. The other thing I'm very troubled by is the police department currently is using a lot of parking on the street. It seems to me if we can divert 8 cars off the street into this parking lot, we free up 8 other parking spaces in a very difficult area in West Newton, available not just to this individual tenant, but to every business in that area. And I think all of us have heard time and again how parking is very difficult for folks. So here we have an opportunity to expand the public parking supply, even if the police department has a net zero gain. And by the way, maybe the police department needs more, but I'm very surprised that the planning department would recommend that we lease it out here. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, President Laredo. Councilor Lipoff.
Thank you. Barring that we have enough space to put parking spaces behind this lot line and it's a non-issue, then there's nothing to do. The reason why we're here is that it was a 40-year lease that's coming due that we have to deal with. So I think this is pretty simple. Given if these spaces only exist because of this lease that allows them to be full size, then Mr. Lee is coming to us saying, we've been doing this for 40 years. The owner of the property would like to retain these. If there's any graciousness on their part to give us those spaces in off hours, I think that's a wonderful thing. I think the income that we've been getting from these spaces and a new lease that would be I think renegotiated at a current rate that would be good for the city makes sense to us. It sounds like the police department isn't saying we have to have this land back for their use. So I think we may be making this more complicated than it is. I was hoping that the plot plans we were looking at were accurate. And if you're telling me that some site survey needs to be done, I think that should have been done before we had this meeting to present to us accurate lot lines. So we're discussing something that doesn't have any question marks. But if these lot lines are correct, this is pretty straightforward to me, that after a 40-year lease ends, we either say we want the land back if it's usable, or we release these spaces to a property that will pay us, that will use them. And if they're so gracious to give us use, then that's wonderful as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Lipoff. Counselors Albright and Wright, and Cassidy, do we have any other hands up that I cannot see?
Counselor Lucas, Oliver, Gentile, and Block.
Lucas, Oliver, Gentile, and Block. Okay, Counselor Block has not spoken, so it will be Albright, Wright, and then Block. Go ahead, Counselor Albright.
Thank you very much. I have a question about, you know, which way these spaces go financially benefits the city. Do we know the answer to that? I mean, what happens to the value of the building if it no longer has any parking spaces? Therefore, what happens to the tax base, the taxes that we get from that building versus, and plus what the income we get from the rental of the spaces versus having 8 parking spaces which may or may not be useful, that people in West Newton can use. I mean, it feels to me like there's an assessment that could be done and presented to the committee of which way makes more sense for the city of Newton. Mr. Heath, do you have a sense of how that would look?
I don't, but I can certainly speak with the assessing department to determine what that means in terms of tax revenue with respect to a building. It's kind of a nuanced question, but I understand the general gist is whether or not, and Council Lipoff isn't here, as to whether the property is more valuable with parking spaces or without them, and whether or not a property is likely to be leased or not leased without parking.
Yeah, I think the assessors would have a good sense for that. And if you're going to hold this item, I would like the answer to that question. Thanks, Ms. Chair.
Thank you, Counselor Wright.
Thank you. First off, it's been empty for a while, so anything going in here will be, I think, a higher assessed value than what it is presently. And I do believe, you know, parking or no parking may have an effect. But if they claim VC1 or VC2, I think this lot is, they don't require any parking. Personally, well, first off, we talked about the 6 spots at the end. We should take 6 spots off of Davis Street, or is it Davis Ave? Davis Street, and have the police park there instead on Davis Street, because it's been creeping along and they've been taking more and more spots along Davis Street. And then right now, because there is issues with parking, and especially if the theater opens up again, these other spots, maybe we can angle it or whatever. I think it would be useful for the police again, and we get some more street parking open. And whoever's in that building can use those street parking too. And especially as a VC1, they don't require, or VC2, they won't require any parking at all. If we knew it was a bank and we could have it and write it in the contract, like after 6 p.m. or whatever, we could have the use of these parking spots. But if it's a restaurant, it may be open from 7 a.m. to 11 at night. So there's really no use that we're going to get it out of those spots in West Newton. And I think that's, you know, that's definitely the downside of that. Do we know if they're going to claim or use this building as a BU? I think it's BU1 or VC2.
I don't have the answer to that. Perhaps Attorney Lee does.
We have not gotten that far. We're still looking for a potential tenant.
Okay. Because I believe, you know, they can say VC2 and not do anything in the building and, you know, not require any of the parking. Okay. That's about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Black.
Just, I'd like to make a suggestion that no one has mentioned so far. I don't see why a land swap isn't the natural way to resolve this. Whatever portion is owned by the bank and whatever portion is owned by the city, land could be swapped so that a certain number of full parking spaces would be owned by the bank, and the rest of the property would be publicly owned. There may be a minor discrepancy that we'd have to kind of figure out, and whatever goes in the building, the 2 or 3 full parking spaces, or 4, or whatever it turns out to be arithmetically, would belong to the building, and the rest would belong to the city, and the city decides what to do with it, whether it's police or the public or whatever. So I think that's equally a simple solution as what Councillor Lipoff was suggesting. And I think it builds on what Councillor Laredo said, so that we get the arithmetic exactly correct. So that's just my comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Block. I think I thank you for that comment. It's an interesting idea. I think it's beyond the scope of what we're dealing with today, but it could certainly be discussed later. Let's go back to Councillors Lucas, Oliver, and Gentile. Do you have your hands up for new questions? Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. Lawrence Lee, did I hear you say you don't know if you're going to opt into the VCOD?
Correct. We do not
Okay.
know.
Okay, you don't know. So the current use is business use 1, which you are obviously aware of. But I think, and I'm going to have to go to Director Heath on this one. In the VCOD, do we allow banks on the first floor?
We do not.
So that would be, I think I answered Lawrence Lee's final question. If they're going to opt into VCOD, I don't think they can.
If it's a bank, that's correct.
If it's a bank, it's a use that's not allowed. Would it be allowed with a special permit?
I don't think so. I'll check on that while we're talking.
Okay, thanks.
It would be Director East. Special permit for VC2 ground floor.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you. So it's unlikely you're going to opt into VCOD. My other question would be for you, Director Heath. If we do not lease these parking spaces to One Chestnut, and we are unable to move the parking spaces back 5, 6, 7 feet, and we can only do parallel parking, do you know what the dimensions are for parallel parking off the top of your head?
I do not. I think that would require some sort of survey.
Okay. Oh, no, in our ordinance.
Yeah, no, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay. All right. Well, seeing as how we have many questions, we don't know the size of the dimensions, and I want to hear from the Ward 3 councilors. My recommendation right now would be to hold this item so we can get the answers to our questions, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Oliver, you're next.
Great, thank you again, Madam Chair. I just had a couple of my questions answered, so I think I'm down to basically one question now, and that is, I was poking around the assessor's database while we were talking here, and was trying to figure out if I could get a little better bead on where the actual lot line is, but I got sidetracked. Is this property that we're discussing right on the corner where Bank of America is, in the assessor's database, it's listed as both One Chestnut and One Chestnut Rear? That might not have any bearing whatsoever on the conversation. I'm just curious. It sounds to me like we're creating a short or perhaps a lengthy list of questions to get some answers to. And that might just be a bit of a hiccup in the assessor's database. I don't know, but I'd like to add that to the list of questions. And I do think that Councilor Lipoff brought up, an interesting point in terms of the, let's not make a mountain out of a molehill here. But I do think that, at least from my perspective, I don't want to make a mountain out of this. I just want to see what kind of language we would end up having to put into, a potential lease. I personally think that it's more important that we protect these spaces for residents' use in West Newton than to honor, previous agreements with, a tenant who is now vacating the city. So from that perspective, I think my starting point might be a little bit different. But at the end of the comment here, I think Councilor Lipoff brought up a great point. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Oliver, Councilor Gentile.
Thank you. I've been looking at the map or the survey that was in our packet because I couldn't see the one on the screen very clearly, but I think they were the same. I just want to have somebody confirm that we've been talking about, 8 spaces, but there are 14 spaces, and the other 6, are those wholly owned by the city?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, because on the map that I have, we have blue and we have red, but then there's a green that was introduced, and I'm not sure what that green is supposed to be showing.
That represents what was previously leased. So it was all of those spaces.
All right, thank you. That explains that.
Yep.
So then, let me just cut to the chase. I find myself in agreement with most of the other folks that have shown a concern about leasing these spaces long term. Right now, as things stand, I don't have a problem with trying to maintain the status quo. The police department has said for at least now, they don't, see a need beyond what they currently use for parking. So if we can work something out through a license agreement for a shorter term, I think that would be fine. What I don't want to see happen is for us to basically give up control of this area of these parking spaces. I think that would be short-sighted. So I would not want to see us open this up for these spaces for sale or lease, especially, a lease for a very long time, which will take them out of play, because I could see not too many years down the road, I heard Acting Chief McMains talk about some pretty intense use once they get the annex figured out. And that sounds like they're gonna need a lot of parking to do the things that they want to do for training and so forth. And I think it would be a big mistake for us to tie this up the way it worked out fine before in 1984, but for us to enter into anything that's, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, I think that would be a mistake. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Cassidy, do we have any other counselors that would like to speak?
Counselor Maliki and Counselor Wright.
Okay, let's go with Maliki first and then Wright. Go ahead, Counselor Maliki.
Yeah, thanks. Just to follow up a bit on what Counselor Laredo said, and also Counselor Block, who I'm glad he brought up the land swap idea, because I was looking at that too, and that is certainly one alternative. But I think there ought to be a good survey of this land that marks out the land that the city actually owns along the split spaces. I did my best to measure it today with Counselor Oliver, and it does seem like we own more than half. I think another thing to do is get somebody from engineering or whoever to figure out how else the lot could be laid out. I mean, for example, rather than keeping the spaces along the side where they are, we could make somewhat diagonal spaces along the southern part of that, where the police department currently has 3 or 4 parallel spaces. And if you put a lot of you might fit in more spaces diagonally on that side without needing the bank portion of the spaces. And we have control over the curb cut. So if the curb cut needed to be adjusted, that could potentially be done. Thank you. And I would agree with holding it.
Okay, Counselor Wright.
I just want to say again is, the police are using some of the Davis Street spaces, and unbeknownst to us Ward 3 counselors, they took more spaces. So if anything, if we can get more of those cars off Davis Street and into this lot, it would help the parking situation in West Newton Square. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are we all set, Cassidy, on counselor comments?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, it seems to me also that lots of police use the public metered spaces on the street that are certainly very sought after by the public. And if we could get some of these officers into those, into those 6 spaces to start out with, that would open up 6 spaces on the street. Do we have a motion? It seems to me that the will of the committee is to hold. Do we have a motion to hold?
I'll move hold.
I'm happy to move hold, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a motion to hold. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 I think Councilor Lucas was the original motion to hold, wasn't he?
All right, all right. Against?
Yep.
One against?
No.
Counselor Getz?
To hold,
Oh, okay, motion to hold. All right. So we have any abstentions? Okay, it looks like it's unanimous in a motion to hold. We will move to hold this item and we will take it up next meeting. The next meeting, by the way, we have potentially set at either Thursday, the 18th of July, or Wednesday, the 17th of July. And Cassidy Flynn will get to everyone to make sure that we can all, you can all make it on one day or the other. So let's go now to the second item that we have tonight, which is item number 36-24, the reuse of the parcel of land on Grove and Hancock Streets. Director of Planning and Development submitting on November 3rd, 2023, a letter stating that the 36,356 square feet of city-owned parcel of land known as 169 Grove Street and 136 Hancock Street should be made available for sale or lease pursuant to the City of Newton Ordinance Section 2-7. This was held on March 28. It was held again on January 25th, excuse me, and again on March 28th. So let us hear first from Attorney Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Give me one moment.
Would you like to wait and first go to Council Barney Heath?
No, I just needed a second to bring up my PowerPoint. This is going to look very similar to the prior one with a few differences because there's a building on this property or buildings on this property. And just to quickly show the history that the chair went through. So as the chair mentioned, it was initially taken up by the reuse committee in January 25th, 2024. At that date, they actually determined to hold a public hearing prior to making the initial determination. That public hearing was held on March 28th, and the public hearing was held open. Again, we have the a chart showing where we are in the process. I didn't outline it in red, but we are still in the same process that we were for the prior item, which is the reuse committee needs to make an initial determination. Initial determination, either that the property go back to the city agency that holds it, which is Public Buildings, or it be made available for lease. And again, initial determination is non-binding. Oh, there it is. The initial determination is non-binding if the determination is to make it available for lease. If the initial determination is to send it back to the agency that holds it, then that is a recommendation that goes to the full city council. When I say that the initial determination is non-binding, if it's to make the property available for lease, that is because what the initial determination really does is it starts the process for further evaluation and research into what the potential use of the property could be if it is made available for lease, but also to identify other city uses that need to be considered. And the JPG, the Joint Advisory Planning Group, that is automatically created if the initial determination is to make the property available for lease, works with the planning department to identify these alternative uses. And then the JPG will file a written report with its recommendations to the reuse committee. I've included a slide here about waiving the JPG at the request of the chair. You heard me in the prior item say very clearly that property that does not have a building on it that is owned by the city, that JPG or a reuse process with that property, the JPG can be waived just by the Real Property Reuse Committee by a majority vote. Waiving the JPG for a property that has buildings on it, like this one, is different. The Real Property Reuse Committee cannot waive the JPG on their own. What they can do, though, is they can recommend to the full city council to waive the JPG, and then the city council would have to waive that JPG requirement by 2/3 vote. And I also included here just a quick slide on if the JPG is waived, what the options are for the Real Property Reuse Committee, and I'm happy to go through that if that is in fact what the committee intends to do. And although a public hearing has been held and actually is still open, I do want to make clear that another public hearing later on this process does have to be held pursuant to the ordinances. And again, that public hearing has to be held after there is a report. After there's a report from the JPG, and if there is no JPG, after the report is received from the Director of Planning and Development. Then after the public hearing, again, the reuse committee has to make its final recommendation to the full city council. And that final recommendation is whether or not the property should be leased and the minimum sale price and specific use characteristics. Or they could recommend that the city retain the property and it be sent back to the agency who had declared a surplus, Public Buildings. The full city council is required to vote on the recommendation. If it is a recommendation that it be available for sale or lease, that requires a 2/3 vote. If the recommendation is just that it be sent to the agency who had declared a surplus in the first place, then it's just a simple majority. Once this recommendation comes from the full city council, the mayor will then take the appropriate actions based on the council recommendation. So summary of potential actions for tonight. This is the same, or this is basically the same as what was the summary of potential actions in the last two meetings. The Real Property Use Committee can make an initial determination. If it's available for lease, it starts the process of establishing the JPG. If the recommendation is that it go back to the Public Buildings Department, then that determination, that initial determination is in fact the final determination and it goes to the full city council. If the initial determination, again, is to make the property available for lease, you have that option to create the to waive the JPG, but it is more cumbersome here. And if there's some interest in the reuse committee, I'd be happy to talk through it more, but if not, I'm just going to gloss over right now. And then if the JPG is not waived, the JPG is created, they will work with the planning department, come back with a full report for the city council on potential city uses, and if it is available for lease, what it can be used for, and their ultimate recommendation to the reuse committee. And then the reuse committee will vote on that, and that will, the reuse committee will hold a public hearing. Once the public hearing is closed, the reuse committee will vote on that and it will go to the full city council.
Happy to
Thank you
answer.
very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Let's now have a short presentation by the planning department. Mr. Heath.
I'm going to share my screen again to just provide some clarity about what we're talking about. Okay, so this is the site. It's both Grove Street and Hancock Street. So let me just kind of walk through this oddly shaped portion that we have here. And it's not to be confused with the subject before land use recently, which is the other portion of the Walker Center site. The portion of the city-owned property runs, if you can see my cursor, runs from here on Hancock Street, where there's a driveway, all the way following this line here, up this way, and then back out to Grove Street. Let me pull that up a little bit. And then back out to Grove Street. And it consists of these buildings here, either 3 or 4, depending on how you count them. This building here, this connector building, this building here, and then this building that fronts on Hancock Street. So just in terms of who's here this evening to help answer questions, I know school committee chair is here. The assistant superintendent Hurley is here. Laura Kreitzer from my staff, the director of housing and community development, is here as well. We provided some information in the packet. So again, I'll make my presentation brief, be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Let's now go to School Committee Chair Bresky. Thank you very much for coming. I'd like to hear any comments that you might have to say.
Thank you, Councilor Danberg. I really am just here to answer questions. I don't have any prepared remarks.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So let's bring this into committee first, and then we will go hear from the public. Let's see what councilors would like to ask questions. Would you give me a list, please, Cassidy? I cannot see the hands.
Chair Danberg, I'm curious. If you move your cursor all the way to the right, do you see view in your top right-hand corner? Do you
No.
see view?
No.
I gotta come over there one meeting and do this
Yeah.
with you, because you should be able to see everybody like we do. If you
Yeah.
can find view and you go to gallery,
I
you'd
have
be
a-
able to see
I
us
have a
all.
bar on the
Councilor
top. but-
Lipoff is correct. Top right of your screen, Councilor Danberg, all the way to the right, there's view. If you click that, you'll get the beautiful picture of all of us, and you should be able to see which ones of us have raised. their
What do you see
Right
right now in front of you?
Let's see.
Is it just yourself, or what
Okay.
do you see?
No, I've got leave meeting, okay, and then up at the top, it has the date. It's got the battery length.
No,
yeah,
yeah,
and
that's your
You
computer.
know what, why don't we
Nope,
do this?
nothing up
let's-
there.
We'll
we
do
can
it another
this some
time.
other time, and I'm
Yeah,
sure
this is,
staff.
let's
sure
just
our-
get it, let
Councilor
me get it
Danberg-
from
Yeah.
Cassidy. Go
It
ahead,
was worth
Cassidy.
a shot. It was
Yep.
worth a shot.
Counselor Laredo and Counselor Lipoff have their hand raised.
Thank
Okay.
you, Ms. Flynn, and thank you, Chair Danberg. Director Heath, could you put the map back up on the screen? I want to make sure I understand fully what it is we're being asked to dispose of. Could you just outline the area you're requesting get disposed? Are you muted?
I was muted, but I was moving my cursor. So yeah.
I'm
can
sorry,
you,
if you
that's
could
okay.
just.
Can you see my cursor down here on
Okay, so
Hancock?
it's on the bottom of Hancock right now.
Yep, just follow
correct?
this line right up here.
Yep,
It comes to that point. Then it comes to this point. Oops, sorry. Then it comes to that point, and then we go back out to Grove Street. So it's this line right here.
all right, so some
It's
of
about
those,
36,000 square feet, 36,356.
okay.
That's
and-
directly from the survey.
Okay, and so a portion of that is one is a 2.5-story wood building, there's a 3-story brick building, right? And a 1-story wood building,
Correct.
okay. Is the intent to keep those buildings and convert them into some form of housing, or is the intent to raise them?
Yeah, the intent is definitely to preserve them. It is part of the Arbondale Historic District. Laura can speak to that if there are questions relative to that. And the intent is to use them exactly for affordable housing.
Okay, and of this lot, what portion of it will be used by the Williams School?
So that's a great question. I saw Commissioner Morse was on here earlier. He's been intimately involved in the discussions about the portion. I think at the previous committee meeting on this subject, we showed an area adjacent to the school, kind of in this area, but Josh may have
In the
visual.
area where your pointer is now, I'm sorry.
Yeah, let Josh pull up the visual that he has. It's much more instructive than the
Well,
survey
and I
here.
want to make sure we have accurate,
Sure.
I'm a little concerned about just relying on renderings at this point, so I want to be very certain I understand what we're
Yeah.
talking about. So go ahead, please.
Sorry, I'm on, I have 3 meetings going right now, so I did
Oh,
not have
okay.
that- I did not have that pulled up, but give me I can share screen right now and I will.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Happy to, my pleasure. So, this is one of, I have a lot of these that I've sketched together. So this is an informal one that I had at the ready. But it's very, very close. This is, the area that you see that says new playground. This is the area that the 10,000 square feet that under the current plan we have carved out for the Williams School. The exact how we use this space, this was just one little concept that we were playing with early on. This is not, I don't want anybody to think this is a preferred concept. It was just one of many that we
No.
played with.
I'm just trying to, Commissioner, I'm certainly not going to hold you to any degree of certainty here. I'm just trying to understand what we're being asked to transfer. So on this picture, I personally see three houses, one with 169 on it and then 2 others. Director Heath, are those the existing structures we're talking about?
That is correct. Yep.
Okay. And those
And
are
actually-
Go ahead.
Excuse me, if I could clarify, because the brick building you mentioned and the 1-story building, those are actually on the other side. All of the buildings that we're talking about here are wood frame buildings. And I can share pictures with it when
Yeah, it doesn't, please go ahead. I'm just trying to understand what we're focusing on here. That's all. And forgive my, for not my ignorance.
Go ahead, Josh.
I think Laura's going to show us the building.
Laura.
Yeah, let me just show the 2 buildings. This is the building on Hancock Street, 136
Okay.
Hancock. This is the little building that's connected to, I think it's 165 Grove Street. It's the little kind of the third building that's in between the 2 buildings, and this is 161 Grove Street, and it's connected to that second one.
And so all 3 of those buildings are in the parcel of land we're talking about transferring, correct?
Yes, yeah, these are the 3 buildings that we are talking about, yes.
Okay. And the parcel is what, 35,000 square feet? Am I right about that?
I think yes, the survey that Barney showed is about that, yes.
And we're talking about transferring about 10,000 of that to the school department, correct?
Yeah, that's the number that Josh had sketched out.
Okay. And Director Heath, the plan is to sell this to a developer, lease
No.
it to a developer?
Yeah, the city would maintain, and Attorney Lee can speak to that. The city would maintain ownership.
City maintains ownership under what, probably a 99-year lease or
Some
something
sort of
like
some sort
that?
of long-term lease. I think it might be, the extent could be 65.
That's correct. Right now, we have special legislation that lets us lease buildings or lease property with buildings on them for 65 years.
So the idea is we enter into a 65-year lease at fairly favorable terms to allow someone to build affordable housing here because they don't pay land acquisition costs. Is that correct?
I think that's directionally correct. Yep.
Okay. And then the question, it seems to me, is what do the schools need for their needs? I actually want to hear from Chair Bresky, if I could, about what the schools' needs are and if we're allocating a sufficient portion of this land for the schools and if we have some flexibility here. So Chair Bresky, could you comment on that?
Yeah, certainly. So there's the smaller portion of this and the bigger vision of this. And I think from we're going through 4 building projects right now. Williams is not anywhere close to the top of the list of needs when it comes to renovating or replacing our elementary school buildings. And so from that perspective, like there's no large scale renovation expansion of Williams that I would expect to happen in the next decades. I know that there is concerns about the park area, the fields, playground, etc. That's a sort of separate conversation from that bigger conversation of the footprint of Williams School as a whole. So I don't, if you're talking about the carving out some smaller portion of that property, that's a different discussion to the Williams community than to say, we need to preserve all of this for Williams. I will say that I think anytime you have land adjacent to a school building and we are going through this process of figuring out what our footprint is supposed to look like, as a school department, obviously we'd like to preserve all the optionality we can. 65 years isn't optionality. That's not that's sort of meaningless to all of us in the present context. So all I can say is I cannot foresee an expansion of the Williams School in the intermediate time frame. And to the extent you can enhance the property of the school with additional property, that's a separate discussion.
So I understand that and I appreciate that. And we're obviously looking at a potentially 65-year lease. So
Mark,
you have to look beyond that. Just one other question.
Mark, Madam Chair, I just want to point out, and it's good to hear from Chairman Bresky, but I also want to point out that Assistant Superintendent Hurley is here representing the superintendent. So please involve him in these discussions also.
Certainly, Mr. Hurley, didn't mean to slight you in the lightest, the least. So if you want to add something different.
Mr. Hurley we would like to hear from you if you would like to speak.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Liam Hurley here. I would just tell you that I was brought into this when the city was looking at this land with Commissioner Morse. They were real proactive with us. And all along, it was pretty clear that preserving housing was important to the city, but finding adjacent land to Williams was a consideration. And Commissioner Morse had kind of come up with a plan, particularly as it kind of related to the field and parking area, and even had kind of a concept that I think he's shown as well about potential expansion. As Chair Bresky said, We don't have any immediate or even kind of intermediate plans to expand Williams. To the extent that we can add some land to the adjacencies of Williams so that we could, over time, figure out parking and or safety issues in the back, I think that's a benefit. But beyond that, there's no immediate need from an expansion space to the building itself right now. So I think it's just kind of reiterating Chair Bresky's perspective and kind of the scope that Commissioner Morse lined out in his proposal.
Thank you both. I'll yield. I've taken too much time. Thank you, Madam
Okay,
Chair.
thank you, Councilor Loretto, Councilor Lipoff.
Yes, thank you. I don't know that we need to even talk about what's necessary right now. This is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to plan for the future. It's a no-brainer. There's nothing to lose to add some breathing room for parking, for fields to use, and potentially an addition in the future, which may or may not come. There is absolutely zero reason not to take some of this land and give it to the school. It is not needed for the property that is there right now, the historic properties that should be leased into affordable housing. So I think this is great. This is a wonderful thing. We take some land, we give it to the school, we lease these properties. June 7th memo that I'm reading right here says over the first 6 months of the contract, the consultants met with the city staff and conducted visits to the site to assess the physical condition of the structures. The consultants team review was paused at the end of the 2023 to preserve the remainder of the contract to work in conjunction with an anticipated real property reuse JAPG committee for the site. The contract for the Housing Choice Grant, which is providing $235,500 for the project, was initially set to end in June, but has been extended through December 2024 to allow time for this additional work to be completed. So when the time is right, I would like to ask to form a JAPG so we can move forward to figure out exactly what to do with this land. And part of this, ultimately, I would think, would be a final plan to carve off some land to give to the Williams School. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lipoff. Let's hear from Councilors Getz, who is on the committee, and then Councilor Albright. And then if no one else has any further questions, we'll see if we can take some action items. Go ahead, Councilor Getz.
My question is for Andrew Lee. I don't know, in terms of I'm seeing that Josh Morse, formalized the process, and he actually is asking for the property to be released, as he is the one who's in control of the property right now. But in terms of the portioning of the property, would it get subdivided? Would it actually be declared? In terms of, we are not seeing an A&R right now. And so I'm just sort of curious going forward how that would happen, because then it locks it in terms of defining the areas that are going to get potentially redeveloped. So I don't know where we are in terms of that process, or is that going to be, going to happen during the JPEG process? I feel very uncomfortable right now declaring this property as surplus and feeding into the process without first knowing those bounds, because it's going to constrain, what ultimately would be available for the Williams School.
So let me answer it this way, and I'm going to have to defer to Commissioner Morse with regards to exactly is the wrong word, approximately where he's shown on the plans of what property is being declared surplus. So we all sitting here now understand what parcel the city owns that we did the taking of from the Walker Center. And then there's a portion of it that was declared surplus. The entire property that the city owns from the Walker Center, that has not been declared surplus. There's only been a portion of it. And then a carve out that, again, I think that it's shown as a approximate on a sketch with a line of an approximate amount of area of that land that's supposed to be retained for school purposes. Keeping in mind, again, that the whole entire Walker Center property that the city owns is the city has to use it for one of two purposes: affordable housing or school. So that's how it is right now. In terms of when there would actually be a formal survey, I think that's probably not going to happen until there's a determination, a final determination from the city council authorizing the mayor to declare it surplus. Because that's what's going to be needed in order to identify what property is going to be actually leased out.
Counselor Getz, yes, there's 36,356 square feet in the entire parcel. Of that, 10,000, I think it's exactly 10,000 or approximately 10,000 is the amount that was carved out for the Williams School. It's adjacent to the Williams School property. And as Attorney Lee has explained, in order for us to get this information, to do the analysis, we would need to move forward and declare it available for lease, do a JAPG, and then have that process. The neighborhood would be involved in that. There are 5 members that come from the city council and 4 members that come from the mayor. We would give them the time that they need in order to do the full analysis on this. So I think an analysis is premature. At this point, we need to move forward and decide that we're going to, whether we're going to do something with in the line of lease. Councilor Albright?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heartily endorse Councilor Lipoff's idea of forming the JAPG as soon as possible. You can have a representative of the school committee on it. You can have representatives of the affordable housing community on it. You can have people on this committee that represent all the questions that we all still have about this, and let them do the analysis and come back to you with the answer. So I would highly recommend that we get that committee formed and get this analysis done as soon as possible.
Thank you, Councilor Albright. Do we have any other, Ms. Flynn, do we have any other members of the committee that would like to speak before I reopen the public hearing?
Councilor Lucas and Councilor Block.
Yes, okay, Councilor Lucas first and then Block. Go ahead, Councilor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. I also was just going to remind you that the public hearing is still open. For Attorney Lee, can you just go over the JPEG process again, please? It's 9 members, 5 appointed by the city council, 4 appointed by the mayor, I believe. And who is it? The city council president that makes the appointments?
That's where you don't need me, Councilor Lucas. You had it all correct. So the city council president appoints 5 of the members out of the 9. The mayor appoints the other 4.
And the 5 could be, well, he's right in front of me
It's at President Laredo's discretion.
Okay, all right. I'm sure he'll make the 5 best appointments.
I'll use my discretion wisely and appropriately, Councilor Lucas.
Okay,
And that he will.
Yeah. And how much time again does the JPEG need in order to make their, I think it's written report back to the Real Property Reuse Committee?
I want to say 180 days. Give me 1 second. It's 180 days from the date when all members have been appointed, or within such further time as the Real Property Reuse Committee may permit. You all might remember with the Armory, an extension was required, and the Real Property Reuse Committee they just voted to extend it out another. I can't remember how long, but they voted for an extension. That's all that would be required here.
So
I think in this case, excuse me, Councilor Lucas, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but to answer your question, in this case, since December is a month when it's very hard to get people together, if we were to, let's say, have December 1 as the date in which the JPG would return their report. If they need more time, they can just come back to us and ask for more time and we can extend it.
Okay. All right. So that's what I was going to get at. All right. All right. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you, Chair. Attorney Lee.
Okay. And I think Councilor Block, you had requested.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Danberg. I guess I'm just a little confused about the property reuse process and this JAPG committee that would be established. I thought that the property reuse committee would need to conclude that this property was surplus in order to take the next step. That's not
That's right.
true.
That's correct. Yes.
Madam Chair, can I clarify? And I understand your question completely, Councilor Locke, because I want to, the initial determination to make the property available for lease, I think that's somewhat of a misnomer because, and saying it's non-binding isn't good enough, right? I think it truly is a misnomer. Really what the Real Property Reuse Committee is voting on is, shall we have the JAPG conduct further study and evaluation? That's really what they're voting on. Because after that whole process, nothing is set in stone or even, nothing is even written on paper. The Real Property Reuse Committee can make whatever determination they'd like, notwithstanding what the JAPG recommends, notwithstanding what they've done prior. So again, it's just making a determination on whether to conduct further study and analysis.
And is that the only way in which this committee can have further study and analysis conducted?
The only other way is they can waive the JAPG requirement, which I explained would require city council approval with a supermajority, and then ask the director of planning and development to submit another report.
Well, I'm glad I'm not a voting member of this committee. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Block. So let's now go, let's go into a public hearing. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak? Cassidy. Do you see any members of the public who would like to speak?
Yes, I'm promoting Dan Powdermaker now.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Dan Powdermaker. I live at 119 Lincoln Street in Newton Highlands, and I just want to encourage the committee to form the JAPG, the planning group, to study and evaluate it. I think that the committee would benefit from, this is my perception, the committee would benefit from hearing more rigorous study. So that's one reason. But the second reason is really has to do with the public. Whatever the outcome is, I believe that the resulting plan is more likely to be accepted by a larger portion of the public if you've done more study. And why do I think this? I was actually just this very morning on a Zoom call with the planners of Westford, Mass. And they were talking about how they had arrived at a much more harmonious decision than Newton or many other cities have around the MBTA community's compliance. And the one thing they emphasized was that they had a broad advisory group that included constituents from the school committee, from the assessor's office, from the pro-housing and negative housing people. And when it came to a vote, and it's town meetings, so it's a different system, they had a much easier road than what Newton went through. And the result is today, I think, a happier community overall. So that's the reason. I think there's other examples that we could point to of that, but I think that more study would be my recommendation and hope that you pursue with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powdermaker. Anyone else? Cassidy.
Yes, I'm promoting Lynn Weisberg now.
Go ahead, Miss Dr. Weisberg.
Good evening, Lynn Weisberg, 5 Alden Street. For all the reasons that have been stated, both by members of the City Council and the reasons stated by Dan Powdermaker, I join in urging the committee to appoint a JAPG. And I would hope, and I understand the composition is determined by the president of the city council and the mayor, but I would hope that in addition to having community representatives, the committee would include housing professionals, people who really have experience and expertise in the area of affordable housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weisberg. Is there
And
any?
by the way, I
Yes.
would be a doctor, but I'm not.
Okay. All right. Well, you look like a doctor anyway, so I believe you're an attorney. Doctor of Jurisprudence, is that not a doctorate? Anyway.
I guess.
Anyway, okay, very, very well. Cassidy, do we have anyone else that would like to speak from the public?
Yes, I just promoted Jane France.
Okay, go ahead, Jane France. Go ahead, Jane.
My apologies. I am arriving at this meeting very late. And I wrote to the city council earlier today. And I would just like to reiterate what Dan Powdermaker said. I think the idea of this, the planning group is extremely important for this particular lot of land. My focus is somewhat different. My concern is that there will be sufficient space in the future for a rebuilt Williams School. And I am concerned that that selling it or leasing it without a proper vetting of this land may put a future group, a future city council in a very tough situation. If they are not able to build a school that is within the keeping of the Mass State Building Authority state guidelines, space guidelines. These buildings, no matter what the enrollment happens to be, are much larger than the buildings that we have now. And so I just want to make sure that that is taken into account. But I think that would, the planning group that I missed the letters there, would definitely be extremely helpful in determining how much land a new building would need from this lot, or if no land, whatever it might be. But it just keeps that situation safe for the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Is that it, Ms. France?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. We appreciate your speaking. Cassidy, are there any other members of the public that would like to speak?
Yes, I just promoted Mary Lee Belleville.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Bell.
Thanks, Councilor Danberg. I'm a little surprised. Can you hear me first of all? I should ask that first. Okay, great. I'm a little surprised that we're not hearing from more parents of Williams School students or immediately adjacent residents. And I'm just curious what notification took place in regards to this public hearing.
Mr. Heath?
I'll defer to Cassidy on that. I think the original public hearing was noticed, but Cassidy, I don't know what the notification process was followed from the clerk's office on this meeting.
Yes.
We noticed the original public hearing. It was kept open by the committee.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Belleville?
Not completely. So the folks who turned up the first time, were they aware there's a second time to speak or to share opinion? If the
Yes.
original, if it was the original notice that stood, or was there a secondary notice is my question.
It was noted, during that public hearing that the public hearing would stay open. It was in the report and Cassidy, do you have any other comments that might help Ms. Belleville's question?
Chair Danberg, I can at least tell you that I personally informed the president of the Williams School PTO about this meeting tonight. And how widely she shared it, I don't know. That was not part of the official notice requirement coming from the city clerk's office, but and I don't know if that answers Ms. Belleville's concern. And I would also point out the public hearing is still open and there could be additional members of the Williams School community who might yet want to comment.
That is helpful. Thanks.
Cassidy, do you have any other comments? From the
Nope,
public?
we followed our legal requirement to notice for this for the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak?
Yes, I'm promoting Tom now.
My name is Tom Gagan. I live at 32 Fern Street, which is about 100 yards or 50 yards from the property in question. And I think that I agree with everybody else who said a study is needed, because I think the people who study this will find this is a very complex issue. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of discussion to come to a satisfactory conclusion that I think resolves the two issues, the schools and housing. So I hope you folks would approve this study group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gagan. Cassidy, anyone
I'm-
else to promote?
Yes, I'm promoting Ashley now.
Hi, can everyone see me?
Yes, your name and address, Ashley, please.
I'm Ashley Remus. I'm at 15 Williston Road. So I'm not only just a stone's throw from the school, but I'm also, my child goes to Williams and I'm part of the PTO. Abby Glovsky and I, she's the PTO president. She and I both spoke recently on recent meetings on this topic, numerous emails to people involved in the school and on this committee. So I'm sure you're familiar with our names. Just a few things I wanted to point out. We did not get a secondary notice. I just like to stay on top of this because it has a lot of meaning and importance to me as a parent of Williams. And I just want to make a few points. I want to echo what Jane France said about the possibility of rebuilding Williams School. If we have a long-term lease on this land, that's not going to allow us to do that. I know that Mr. Bresky noted that we probably won't do it in the next decade or so. But if everyone remembers, Riverside is going to be built right down the street. It's going to be 500 plus units. Randy Block can speak to that because he's highly involved in that. That will be built in the next 10 years, hopefully, knock on wood, certainly within 75 years. So thinking 500 plus units, many of which will be families, literally right down the street from Williams. I think we really have to remember that in terms of the school being expanded within the 75 plus year time frame. And I also wanted to note, Abby and I both spoke to it previously about the athletic fields as well. And the recent Parks and Rec update in this past March, they spoke about how we are at a big deficit of usable athletic fields in the city, especially on park and school land. So I don't know if anybody has spoken to Parks and Rec. I think that having this extra land and possibly knocking down that one house like we spoke about previously would be very beneficial to use that land not only as a possible expansion of Williams School and for the school property, but also for regulation-sized fields, some of which this neighborhood is really lacking, and also just for the benefit of citywide.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
Yes, I'm promoting Abby Glovsky now.
Hi, sorry, can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Abby Gludsky. I'm at 338 Central Street in Auburndale, and I am the president of the Williams PTO. Just to reiterate a little bit about what Ashley said, we did speak at the last meeting. I think we made our points kind of clear as where we thought Williams needed the land. I know that it's not on the list right now for an addition or any improvements, but I think we need to look at what the school needs in the immediate future. And that is, like Ashley said, usable play space for the kids. If you visited Williams, you see that it is not very usable for the kids right now. And also to address the safety concerns around the parking lot that sits in between the school and the field. So we would like to see the committee look into different uses for that land, possibly to help with the playground and for the safety issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Cassidy?
Yes, I'm promoting Ann Houston now.
Good evening. Excuse me. It takes a while to get on here. My name is Ann Houston. I live at 45 Wedgwood Road, and I chair the Newton Affordable Housing Trust. I really am pleased to hear the strong support of having a JAPG to look at this site. It offers, I think we all know how desperately we need more affordable family housing in Newton, and this is an ideal site. If nothing else, the strong support of the PTO really speaks to the great neighborhood that this is for families. But it's a complex site because it's small and there's good existing housing that needs to be reused. And so I really urge the council to support having a JAPG that has the time to really investigate the site and figure out what is the best way to make it available, what's the best reuse, and what's the most fiscally sound reuse. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Houston. Cassidy?
Mary Lee Belleville has raised her hand again, so I can promote.
Ms. Belleville, go ahead.
Thanks for promoting me to speak. I just want to support Ann Houston's comments. I think they're on point, and it's unfortunate that we don't have a venue here that we could easily, I would rather have just raised my hand in support than have to like re-promote myself as a panelist. So I would just encourage the city to revert to a more inclusive approach, so that would be possible. So I completely agree with Ann Houston.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Thank you for your comments, Ms. Belleville. Cassidy?
That is it from the public.
Okay. So I think we are finished with the public comment, so I will close the public hearing. Actually, maybe what we will do is keep the public hearing open until we know the direction of the committee. And so if we have no further questions, let's bring this back into committee, and let's take questions from or comments from committee members and other counselors who are here.
Counselor Gentile has his hand raised.
Go ahead, Counselor Gentile.
Thank you. I wanted to just check in with Attorney Lee about exactly what we're being asked to do this evening. I was under the impression that we were being asked to take a formal vote on whether or not this parcel should be made available for sale or lease pursuant to the City of Newton Ordinances, Section 2-7. That's what we have always done in the past, but I heard Attorney Lee talk about, that we're here to vote to study the issue further. And I do think that there's it would probably make sense to also make it clear, either through a second motion or whatever, that there should be a JAPG formed, and that's where the study is. But I really think we're supposed to be taking the formal action on, the sale or lease.
Counselor Gentile, well, go ahead, Counselor Lee, and then then I have some comments in the end. Go ahead, Counselor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the action with regards to the recommendation of the sale or lease, that doesn't happen until the end of the process, and the end of the process being after the next public hearing, after the JAPG, after the report. So all of that has to happen first. This is just one step in the process, and what's being asked tonight is making an initial determination to make the property available for lease. What that means, notwithstanding what it's called, what that means is form the JAPG and conduct further study and evaluation on identifying alternative uses for the property.
But maybe
that's what's happening tonight.
Andrew, maybe I misspoke then. I guess I should have used the word declaring the property surplus. Isn't that the step that we're being asked to take?
No, you're being asked to make an initial determination, and that is the exact language from 2-7.
And so what is the initial determination that we're being asked to make?
You're being asked to make an initial determination. It is up to the Real Property Reviews Committee. You have two choices. Send it back to Public Buildings, and then that's going to be your recommendation to the full City Council. The process in the Reviews Committee is done. Or make an initial determination to make the property available for lease. If that is the determination, the JAPG is created to, again, conduct further study and evaluation.
So we can just make an initial recommendation for lease and not also sale. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. And in fact, I think that the exact language that the Public Buildings Department used in terms of the surplus was incorrect. And I confirmed that with the Commissioner as well. It was the parameters of the surplus was to make the property only available for lease. The city still requires the fee ownership of it, again, because 65 years, 100 years later, who knows what's gonna be needed for it. So the parameters are only to make the property available for lease, not sale.
Okay, well, that's an important point to me because I'm not interested in selling the land. I could be open to a lease, even though it's going to be a long-term lease. Because I keep going back and forth, which is why I'm pressing on this point. I'm not even sure that we need to be taking this action. If there are parts of me that think that we should just return it to Public Buildings because we know what we want to do and work it through that way. But I can also see the value of of setting up the JAPG. My concern with a JAPG is you lose control whether you want to admit to it or not. I've seen it with other JAPGs. So I just want my fellow councilors to understand that where the council is going to be, if we vote to do this, that the council is going to be giving up a fair amount of say over this site, including what it eventually sells for. And that's, we purchased this land for $2.5 million. I hope that the JAPG doesn't lose sight of that. But they're ultimately with us going to set a minimum sale price. So, and there are other ways that you lose some of the authority, but as I said, I heard other people speak, and I can also see the value of getting more people involved through the JAPG. So I just want to make sure that we're only talking about leasing here and not sale, and I think you confirmed that.
Yes, that is in fact the case, Councillor Gentile. And let me also just remind you, which you probably already are aware of, that the recommendation of the JPG is just that. It's a recommendation. We do not have to, the real property reuse does not have to, nor does the city council have to follow the recommendations of the JPG. But I think that just to get this analysis from them, get all of the interested parties around the table to do a report and have a discussion is an invaluable tool that will help us to make a determination on what to do with this property.
And ultimately, that's the side of the question that I come down on. So when I came here tonight, I wasn't going to vote for it. I said that to Mr. Heath, but I've been convinced that it'll bring in more people and a more thorough exam. So I'm happy to go along with. Ultimately, the city council does have say over a minimum sale price, and with the help of the JAPG's recommendation. But that is the one official role that we have. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gentile. Any other comments from the committee? Cassidy?
Councillor Getz, Lucas, and Malachy have their hands raised.
Okay, in that order. Go ahead, Councillor Getz.
So I am just following the flow chart, the historic flow chart of what happens with the surplusing of properties. So this is to Andrew Lee. If in fact we recommend that the city, that a JPEG be formed, it actually does come back to us, to the reuse committee. Am I correct in this?
Yes, that's correct.
And then we hold another public hearing, and then we, as a committee, make a recommendation after we get the report to the full city council. But and the thresholds are still the same, the 2/3 vote. It's the recommendation to the mayor. I just want to make sure that we're maintaining a certain amount of, and this is going to be a lease process, as I understand. It's not for sale. But my main concern and my hope is that the JPEG would in fact come up with, my real concern is that what would happen would be that that a portion of the land would go into lease and then would be restricted for the need for the Williams School expansion beyond the 10,000 that Commissioner Morris is suggesting. And I don't want that to be the scenario. I think it's a real problem because I really don't want the expansion of the Williams School, as Jane France had mentioned, be restricted if in fact it needs more land. So, but I'm if in fact it comes back to us and then it goes to the full council and then the threshold is the 2/3 vote, is that correct?
So I think I heard two different questions there. I guess let me answer what I think I heard with one of them, which is with regards to what exactly can be leased at the end of this process. And that's only limited to what has already been declared surplus, which again is not the whole piece. That 10,000 that wasn't included in what was declared surplus, there's nothing in this process that can permit that to be leased. That would have to start as a whole new separate reuse process. So that's one piece of it. With regards to the voting threshold, at the end of the whole process, right, when we're talking about the actual property that can be declared available for lease, a determination by the full city council to make that property available for lease requires a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
Does that clarify it for you, Counselor
Yeah,
Deb?
yeah, I wanted to make sure that, you know, I want to hear from a JPEG. I want to hear their best scenario for the parcels. But I'm very concerned that, you know, we're abutting, you know, there are two competing needs here. The housing as well as the expansion of the Williams School. Okay,
All right,
thank you.
thank you. Counselor Lucas.
Thank you, Chair. So it is my recommendation that we form a JPEG, and we should do that tonight. Another process question for Attorney Lee. I just want to make sure we cross our T's and dot our I's. The JPEG will make a recommendation, a written report, and that written report goes to real property reuse or to the city council.
Goes to real property reuse. It comes to us.
It comes back to us, and then we will have to take a vote to accept it. Is that right? No.
You don't take a vote to accept it. That is the report that you get from the JAPG. The next step after you get the report, you have to hold a public hearing.
And that's it. So we vote to form the JPEG. We accept the report, we hold the public hearing, and then it goes to the city council.
Then the real property reuse committee has to make their actual recommendation, their final recommendation to the full city council.
We make a recommendation to the full city council. Okay.
Through a board order, Tariq.
Okay, okay.
That's usually how it's done. That's correct. There'll be a draft board order that you will recommend to the city council to adopt.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Like any other committee work or land use work. Got it.
And I just want to clarify one point. I'm sorry to interrupt. You don't need to vote to create the JPG. I know Councilor Gentile said that it would make sense to do that just for clarification. It wouldn't hurt either. It's absolutely fine if you'd like to. I just want to point out that it's not a strict requirement.
Okay. It is my recommendation that we do it, and Councilor Dearborn, if we are going to do it, we would need to close the public hearing. Just want to remind you of that. That's all. Thanks.
Yes. All right, Councilor Maliki.
Thank you. First of all, is the 65-year time frame, is that a minimum or a maximum, and how is it arrived at?
That's a maximum. And the reason that it arrived to that is under statute, I might be wrong, but under statute with property with buildings on it, municipalities can only lease it for 35 years. We got special legislation some years back, I can't remember when, that allows the city of Newton to lease property with buildings on it for 65 years. I do want to also note there's a possibility that the city could go for special legislation for even longer. For example, the Armory, we got special legislation to lease that particular building for 99 years, but you know, there's steps to do that, and they're not in motion right now.
Okay, because 65 years, it seems both maybe short for somebody who is putting a lot of money into the building, yet also very long to the Williams parents or future Williams parents who would be having their kids maybe grow up and be gone before that portion would be available. Can you put up on the screen, I guess this is for Mr. Lee or Mr. Heath, the language that we are voting on tonight, because can the docket item is written as sale or lease. Can we reword that, amend it to say refer to lease only?
Councilor Maliki, we can have whatever language we want in the motion. And the language will not include the word sale, it will only include the word lease.
Okay. And all right, I guess those are my questions for tonight.
Okay.
I guess I'd just like to add that my big concern is playing field space, because, you know, I've heard repeatedly we need 3 grass fields for every artificial turf field, and that's why we need artificial turf, and there's nowhere to acquire land. And this is someplace we have the potential to have land. And I hate to let that go for kind of the lifetime of a couple of generations of kids. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Maliki. Cassidy, is there anyone else that would like to speak from the committee?
Well, the chair of the school committee has his hand raised, and Counselor Block.
Okay, in that order. Go ahead, Mr. Bresky, and then Counselor Block.
Thank you. So I just want to, hearing this conversation evolve, I just want to make a couple points clear. I think from my perspective, and I'm speaking for myself and not the committee or the administration, I think the concept of, some subdivision of this lot to allow additional field space is a totally different conversation than, the expansion of Williams School, which are two totally different things. I stated, and I stand by that, any expansion of the Williams School is really not likely to happen within decades, whereas an expansion of field space and the ability to have additional flexibility with the property with, that additional 10,000 square feet or something is something totally different and could be, sort of much more accretive to our kids' experience in the near term. I also want to just reiterate the 65-year lease concept is, you might as well sell the land from a school perspective, because as we cycle through our school building properties, we have Ward and Underwood, which everyone is aware of, has been sort of on the blocks forever, of figuring out how do we manage those two buildings, which are, both 100 or so years old. We just got a consultant report back. Pierce is our next building in line in terms in elementary buildings, at least in terms of worst condition buildings. And Pierce and Williams are both two small schools. We are undertaking a very big project to figure out how do we manage this footprint going forward, recognizing that the state will no longer fund 250 student school buildings, of which Ward, Underwood, Pierce, and Williams are all fit in that category. So that is likely to happen in figuring out this part of the problem is likely to happen not immediately, not next year, not in 10 years, but well inside of 65 years. So it would foreclose any possibility of thinking about an expansion in that time frame, which probably does fall in that sort of 20 to 30 year time frame, just using very, very round numbers. So I want to just make sure that I'm clear on those points, that the binary nature of the property relative to thinking about the carve out of the property are two very different things from my viewpoint. And in terms of the city controlling the property, continuing to control the property, having optionality for the school department to potentially expand Williams if that is needed, if Riverside is fully developed. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen there, but those 65-year lease basically forecloses all of that. So I just want to be on record on those two things. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Bresky. Cassidy?
Counselor Block has his hand raised.
Yes, go ahead, Counselor Block.
Thank you again. I'm very heartened by the last several speakers, starting with Ashley Remus, who underscored the potential for additional playing fields for both students and for the city at large. And assuming this committee goes ahead with a JAPG committee, I think there have been mentions of having housing experts on this. I think park and recreation experts are also equally needed. I just want to go back to one other, I hope this isn't the discrepancy, but when Barney Heath outlined the property that we're talking about tonight, it was my impression that it was the entire property. And when Andrew Lee last spoke, he said that the portion that Josh Morse has kind of carved out, this 10,000 square foot portion, that was not part of this this process. Is that, I just want to straighten this out.
Mr. Heath, could you speak on that?
Yeah, I
please?
can. Is my screen showing?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the approximate, if Commissioner Morse is still here, the approximate 10,000 square foot portion that was kind of carved out of the site.
And so this committee's vote and the JAPG's evaluation would just be on the rest of the site, excluding, I guess you're calling it Lot B. Is that?
No, it's only a portion of Lot B.
A portion
It's
of
just
Lot.
Yep. Again, the parcel is like this all the way down to Hancock Street, and it's just this portion right here that contains portions of Lot A and B, both of which are city owned.
Okay.
All right, does that clear it up? Councilor Block?
I have to vote on this, so if you're all happy with it, fine.
I want to make sure that you're clear, that the vote tonight is going to be taken on 136 Hancock Street and 169 Grove Street, and not on the middle portion, which is the school portion, the 10,000 square feet.
Thanks for that clarification. Appreciate it.
Okay.
I have made a motion, just to remind you, Chair.
Say it again.
I've made a motion to
Yes.
create.
First of all, I'm
Remind
going
me.
to ask for, since it appears that we're going to be moving ahead in some form, let us close the public hearing. Councilor Vice Chair Lucas, would you like to make a motion?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, I think we have it. The ayes have it. So, Councilor Lipoff, you would like to make a motion. First, we need a motion to have an initial determination to make the property available for lease. And that, the property that we are referring to would be 169 Grove Street and 136 Hancock Street.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Hold on, please.
Discussion. Yes. Go ahead, Councilor Gentile.
Well, now I'm confused. The docket item talks about 36,356 square feet. It was my understanding that the 10,000 square feet roughly that Josh had shown us when we first started this process was included in that. And now I think I just heard that it's not included. It's included. That 10,000 square feet is part of the 36,000, unless I've been, misunderstanding this since day one. And I think it's pretty important that we, make sure that we get that right.
Mr. Heath, would you speak to that, please?
I see that Commissioner Morse has his hand up. He was the original party that released the property, so.
Commissioner Morse, go ahead.
Thank you. So this might help clear things up. So the 10,000 square feet, and Attorney Lee can certainly jump in on this, but the 10,000 square feet of land that we identified as space for the Williams School parcel expansion it is included in that 35,000 square foot number, but it is not included in the land that would be surplused and sent to the JAPG. Now, to be clear, what that means is that in layman's terms, that we are currently earmarking 10,000 square feet of land to expand the Williams School parcel. The JAPG will study lots of options, including, I would imagine, more land going to the Williams School parcel, and various housing opportunities. So basically, it sets the minimum bar at least 10,000 square feet of land being added to the Williams School parcel.
Madam Chair, I'm confused now, forgive me.
Go ahead, Counselor Laredo.
So I also, like Counselor Gentile, was under the impression that we were being asked to potentially lease 36,000 square feet of land, and that the JAPG was being tasked with studying all of it. I take it from hearing Commissioner Morse just now, that is not correct. And the JAPG is only being asked to study 25,000 square feet of that.
Sinatra, Flynn, Jagger, Richards, all of them.
So I
Commissioner
do
Morse.
think it's very important. And by the way, to be clear, I am very supportive of the JAPG process here. I think for all the reasons stated, it's the right way to go, but I want to make sure that the charge is correct. So Attorney Lee, could you weigh in here a little bit?
I can, and again, I don't know if there might have been a clerical error without taking out the 10,000 square feet, and the confusion is warranted. But Commissioner Morse made it very clear what was declared surplus was that portion of the city property, the 35,000 square feet, excepting that area outlined in red in the sketch that that Director Heath has shown. What that means is that area that's in red, through this process, it can't be leased. There's nothing in this process that would permit that area in red to be leased because it's outside the scope of what is being considered by the reuse committee. So the only areas that could potentially be leased, if the reuse committee so made that recommendation, the city council adopted it, is the remainder of that 35,000 square feet. That 10,000 has to be held back.
So Attorney Lee, though, the administration has indicated its intent to transfer that 10,000 square foot parcel from public buildings to either Parks and Recreation or the school department.
I don't know.
That's my understanding.
I don't know. That would require, again, city council approval in order to do that.
But
Well,
I think I originally had the floor on this. if I
I'm sorry,
may.
Counselor
No,
Gentile.
it's
Go ahead.
okay.
Go ahead, Counselor Gentile.
But what if, the JAPG and all these other folks do this study and conclude that, that the school should get 10,500 square feet, but it's not the section that for some, has been carved out to this point. Why are we tying their hands to that degree? Why aren't we just declaring it all surplus? Josh, are you trying to make sure that the schools get no less than 10,000? Is that the reason that you're doing it or recommending it this way?
That's exactly the case, yes.
So then we can put some language in there, to ensure that the school department for Williams School use, whether it be expansion or fields, gets no less than 10,000. But I don't think at this point that we would want to necessarily tie their hands as to where that lot's going to be. And, maybe it needs to be, as they say, 10,500.
So to be clear, that portion of land, that 10,000 square feet, is not surplus. This is going to sound a little crass, but I don't mean to be. It is not currently under the purview of the real property reuse or the city council. That is currently in the custody of the Public Buildings Department, ultimately Mayor Fuller. And again, what that does is it establishes the minimum amount of square footage that we are earmarking for the Williams School parcel expansion. The JAPG could very well study to increase that. And certainly, I suppose if the JAPG recommended that they don't want to give any land to Williams, their recommendation to the mayor could be to surplus that 10,000 square feet for additional affordable housing. But that recommendation, correct me if I'm wrong, Attorney Lee, would have to go to Mayor Fuller.
It would have to, but I think that this is really not as complicated as we're making it out to be, because I think the Council Gentile, what you said is true. It's 10,000 square feet. That is not part of it. It's a sketch right now with regards to exactly where those limits are. I would fully expect if the JPG came back and said, well, they agree 10,000 is the right number of square feet that should be retained for Williams School, just not exactly where the sketch was outlined. Sure, it could be moved, but then the mayor would have to be in agreement with it, and so would Josh. It's not completely foreclosed to have that opportunity, but I think it's important to understand that at a minimum, 10,000 square feet in the general area where that sketch is, as we sit right now, that is not part of the reuse process. Could it be at a later time if that's the recommendation of the JPG? And then is there an option for that to be wrapped up into here with the commissioner as well as the mayor declaring that surplus? Absolutely. It's not a situation where it's 100% off the table. But to the commissioner's point, the intent there was to hold back 10,000 to make clear that is earmarked for the school.
Not that 10,000, 10,000. Okay, and Josh, crass or not, Public Buildings is in control of all 36,000 square feet right now, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so I guess I don't understand again why you're tying hands. You could have part of the motion say that we're declaring it, surplus for lease, whatever, with no less than 10,000 square feet to go to the Williams Williams School, whatever, and just.
Councilor Gentile, would you like to amend the motion and add that in?
We can't, guys. It hasn't been surplus, Councilor Danberg.
Can I be heard, Councilor Danberg?
Go ahead.
So I want to be really clear here. From what I'm hearing from the law department and Commissioner Morse, we cannot say we're just going to do 10,000 feet anywhere we want, because the department has not even declared that surplus yet. My problem with this, the way it's worded right now, is that the administration is essentially predetermining the use of 10,000 square feet of land, and we might, after we have a JPG, decide that that same 10,000 square feet should be at a very different place in this parcel. And that's problematic under the way this is proposed, because we could propose that and the administration could say, nah, we don't like that. And we have no recourse. So I'm very troubled by that. And I don't think that was the intent. I think the intent was a good one, which is we are reserving at least 10,000 square feet for school use. And that makes sense. But the problem is the way this is being presented to us, we are not able to have that flexibility. Now, I suppose a JPG could study it and study the entire 35,000 square foot parcel, although it's really not in his purview. But I'll leave it to my colleagues. I'm going to support this, I think, but I'm very uncomfortable about how we're getting here.
Commissioner Morse, do you have any comments on that?
May I share screen real quick? I just want to, and
Please
it's something
do.
in our backup, and I think this is important to point out. So I'm going to zoom in a bit here. So this is the letter that I sent. I just want to read this into the record. However, roughly 10,000 square feet of the lawn area directly adjacent to the Williams Elementary School shall remain in the custody and control of the Public Buildings Department, while the exact dimensions of the land to remain in the custody and control of the Public Buildings Department have yet to be determined. A rough conceptual site plan is included in this correspondence. So it's exactly as people are suggesting. And what I meant by this is I'm trying to make sure that we just don't get ourselves into trouble with respect to what the city council is voting on this evening. But I do want to be clear that two things. One, our intention here was to ensure that at least 10,000 square feet of land area was available to Williams, and recognizing that the JAPG has to do their work and that there's a lot of study that has to go on. I use that language very carefully to talk about rough dimensions. And what I mean by that, very specifically and on record here, is that 10,000 square feet may be in a different configuration. It may be in a slightly different place on the site. We did want to provide ourselves some wiggle room, but at the same time provide assurances that some of that land area would be available to the Williams School parcel.
Okay, any other questions? Counselor Getz?
Yeah, I'm just now in a situation where I'm hearing Commissioner Morris say that they have complete control of the parcel, in terms of public buildings, and the mayor. So now I'm looking at the docket item and I'm seeing it defined as the 36,000 square feet. And there's no mention of this, of the specificity and what you had read in terms of in the letter. So these are conflicting for me. And I don't know whether or not the docket item has to be amended, or, I'm very concerned that in fact, at a minimum, the 10,000 is part of the picture, but I would like for the JPG to actually consider much more than that for the Williams School expansion.
Madam Chair, can I speak to that? So then just
Yes,
to be
go
clear,
ahead, go ahead.
just to be clear,
Really?
the JPG isn't considering the 10,000 for the Williams School expansion, or the Williams School in general, or school use. They're talking about everything else, the remainder of that 35,000. But in terms of priority, there may have been again, a clerical error in the docket language, but it's the surplus letter that controls here, because that's what it is that started this whole process. Surely there could be a way to clarify that with the clerk's office, and we can discuss the steps with them offline to figure out how to make sure that is properly reflecting what's being said in the surplus letter. But what Commissioner Morse has represented to you today, as well as myself, that is correct as to what is under the purview of the reuse committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lee. Any other comments? Cassidy?
Council Gentile still has his hand up.
Go ahead, Counselor Gentile.
So Josh, I'm sure you're getting a little aggravated with us and maybe the director of planning, but the docket item that we've been looking at now for probably, 6 to 8 months, has talked about 36,356 square feet, when it actually should be talking about 26,356 square feet. I didn't write the docket item. The clerk's office didn't write the docket item. It came from you folks. That's a pretty big error, and we're just trying to get it straightened out.
Councilor Gentile, I completely agree with you. I will say the docket language did not come from myself. I submitted the letter and the backup that was included. But I do agree, it should not read 35,000 square feet.
So I think that at the least, when this comes to I think the intent is clear. I really wish that it just said 36, the entire site, with no less than 10,000 going to the school department. I think that would have been very simple, clear, and we all could have worked with that. But I think if you're not willing to do that, then we at least need to get the numbers right when it comes to the full council. So, and I'm sure you can do that between you and Andrew and Bonnie can do that. I think we're all clear on what the intent is now. But for 8 months now, I thought we were talking about 36,000 square feet.
Thank you, Counselor Gentile. Any other questions before we act on Counselor Lipoff's motion?
Can we hear
Cassidy?
the motion?
Would you, Cassidy, would you read the motion, please?
I believe Councilor Lipoff's motion was to make the initial determination for lease of the property.
That's the first step, and the next would be the JPG if.
Yes, the JPG will happen if we get a yes on moving this.
So moved.
Initial determination. Okay. We have a motion. All those in favor say aye.
Ms. Chair,
Go ahead, Counselor
I'm going to
Gentile.
abstain for now. I wish that there, in this motion, had referenced, approximately 26,356 square feet, so we all know what we're talking about. But I'll wait. I'm going to abstain and wait and see what the final language is that comes, to the full council.
Attorney Lee, is there a reason why we cannot specify that it would be 26,000 square feet?
That's not a problem. You can make the motion to say that it is to an initial determination to make the 26,000 square feet and plus or minus available for lease. That's absolutely fine.
Counselor Gentile, would you like to make that motion, that amendment?
Well, Council Lipoff made it. If he says he considers it a friendly amendment, I think we're good to go.
Counselor Lipoff?
Fine with me.
Can I just make one more friendly amendment here?
Go
that we
ahead.
not-
Go ahead.
that we
Yes.
not be locked into the specifics of the rendering that Commissioner Morse provided.
Thumbs up he gave you.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
All
Fine.
right. Any other comments before we vote?
Counselor Maliki has her hand up.
Counselor
Yeah.
Maliki, go
I
ahead.
had a very similar request because I was ready to explain to, can we just simply say up to, make available for lease up to 26,356 square feet?
Counselor, Attorney Lee?
That's all fine. This is a non-binding recommendation.
Okay. All right, we'll make that amendment. All those in favor of the motion as amended, please say aye.
All right.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. It appears that it's 8-0. Thank you very much.
Whoa,
Counselor-
Now, we,
Counselor Danbury, we
Yep.
need to hold the item.
okay, let us have a motion to hold the item.
Was
So
someone gonna make a motion to form the JAPG, or you just
We
gonna?
we don't need to do that if we have a yes. The process goes forward to form the JPG.
Chair Danberg, just a quick point of privilege. If any colleagues have or any member of the public watching has suggestions as to who might serve as the council representatives on the JPG, would you please let me know? I'd like to cast as broad a net as possible for potential volunteers. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Councilor Laredo, President Laredo. Okay, Cassidy, is there anything else that we need to do this evening before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
We just have to make the motion to hold the item and vote on it.
Okay. May I have a motion to hold?
I'll move it.
Okay, we have a motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Good. Okay, thank you all very much. And someone make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Night all.
Opposed? Abstentions? We're adjourned. Thank you so much.